Okay, so if you've been around church for, well, any amount of time, you've definitely heard about tithing, right? And let's be honest, it can get kind of confusing. Sometimes there's even a lot of pressure around it. Is giving 10% this non-negotiable, absolute rule for every Christian? Is that what the Bible actually says? Well, that's what we're going to dive into.
Yeah, that's really the big question, isn't it? Is giving 10% a timeless command from God? On the same level as something like, do not steal? Or is it something else entirely? To get to the bottom of this, we really have to go on a journey through the whole Bible. And that means we've got to start right at the beginning.
All right, so let's rewind. We're heading way back to the book of Genesis. This is long before the law of Moses. The big set of rules for the nation of Israel was even a thing. And what's interesting is that the idea of giving a tenth does show up here. But, and this is a big but, the context is absolutely everything.
So check this out. The first two times we see anything like a tithe, it's not what you'd expect. First, you've got Abram. He gives a tenth of the spoils of war to this priest king. But here's the thing. It's a one-time deal. It's totally spontaneous, a way to show honor after a big victory. God never told him to do it. Then you have Jacob. He makes a personal vow to God, saying if God blesses him, then he'll give a tenth back. See the pattern? In both cases, it's a voluntary, personal act. It's not a standing order for everyone for all time.
So, if these early examples were totally voluntary, that raises a pretty obvious question, right? Where did the actual rule about tithing come from? Well, that's a huge turning point in the story, and it brings us right to the time of Moses and the birth of Israel as a nation.
Okay, so when tithing does become an actual law, under what's called the Mosaic covenant, it's not the simple 10% we usually talk about today. Not even close. It was this really complex, multi-layered system that was woven into the very fabric of Israel's national life, their economy, their society, the whole shebang.
Let's break this down, because this part is wild. There wasn't just one tithe. There were actually three of them. First, you had the Levitical tithe. Think of this as the salary for the Levites, the priestly tribe who didn't get any land. Then there was a festival tithe, and get this, the people who gave it actually got to eat it themselves during big religious celebrations. It was like a national party fund. And on top of that, every third year there was a poor tithe, which was basically a social safety net for the vulnerable. So when you actually do the math, it comes out to something like 23% a year, way more than just 10.
So here's the key takeaway from all this. The Old Testament tithe wasn't really like putting money in the offering plate on a Sunday morning. It was much, much more like a national tax system. I mean, this was the economic engine that funded the entire nation of Israel, the priesthood, the religious festivals, even the social welfare programs. It was foundational to their entire society as a nation ruled by God.
But even then, it was never just about the money. The prophets later on came in and basically said, hey, you can bring in all the tithes you want. But if you're ignoring justice and mercy, if your heart isn't right with God, it's all meaningless. The act itself was supposed to be an overflow of a faithful heart, a sign of real loyalty to God, not just paying a bill.
And that focus on the heart, that's the perfect setup for where the story goes next, to the New Testament and the New Covenant, which is all about God's new relationship with people through Jesus. So, the big question is, when Jesus shows up and the church is born, does this old tithing system just carry over? Let's see.
Now, Jesus does talk about tithing. He calls out the religious leaders for being super nitpicky about tithing every little herb from their garden while totally ignoring the huge things like justice and mercy. He says they should have done both. But, and this is a super important detail, who was he talking to? He was talking to Jewish people who were still living under that old Mosaic law. This is all happening before his death and resurrection kicked off the new covenant. And in all his teaching, he never, not once, commands his followers or the church that's about to be born to tithe.
And this really shows the massive shift you see across the rest of the New Testament. Giving completely changes. It goes from being a required national tax to a voluntary, joyful response from the heart. The motivation isn't a legal rule anymore. It's this deep desire to be a part of what God is doing through the gospel. You see this all over the place in the early church. People were selling their land to help the poor, taking up special collections to send out missionaries. It was a whole new paradigm.
So, why the huge change? I mean, this is a dramatic shift, but it's not random. It's tied to something much bigger, a fundamental change in how God was working in the world. See, the entire system that the original tithe was built to support, well, that whole system was about to be completely transformed. Okay, follow the logic here. Step 1. The old tithe was all about funding a very specific setup, a physical temple in Jerusalem, a priesthood tied to a specific family line, and a nation based in a specific land. Step 2, Jesus comes and he fulfills all of that. He is the new temple, he is the new high priest. Step 3, because of that, the old structure the tithe supported, it doesn't exist anymore. There's no central temple, no priestly tribe to support. And finally, step 4, giving is now tied to a global mission, not a local institution. The whole game has changed because the very things that tithe was for have found their ultimate meaning in Jesus himself.
I love this quote because it just nails the shift perfectly. The vision of giving in the New Testament does not lower the bar, it removes the floor. Think about that. The call for Christians isn't to hit a 10% minimum anymore. It's a call to a way more radical, sacrificial generosity that just overflows from a heart that's been changed by grace. It's not about checking a box, it's about your whole life reflecting the incredible generosity of God.
So, where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with a really personal and maybe even a challenging question. If the goal isn't just hitting a certain percentage, but instead it's about a joyful, proportional, and sacrificial response to what God has done for us, what does that actually look like for you? For your finances? For your resources? How does that shape your part in God's mission in the world today? Now that is something worth wrestling with.